Coming up next, we have Brian Stelter, media reporter for the New York Times. So instead of the traditional bio, I thought I would tell you things you should know about Brian. He's originally from the great state of Maryland. He's a graduate of Towson University. Go Tigers. He launched and sold TVNewser.com prior to joining the New York Times. He loves karaoke. The Notebook is one of his favorite movies. He loves to simul-tweet, so you should find him at drinks and tweet it up together. And he always wanted to be a weatherman, and he came very close covering Hurricane Irene from North Carolina, where he shared a lot of photos on Instagram. So he's going to talk about his experience at the New York Times, being a young reporter there who's pretty much addicted to social media. So please join me in welcoming Brian Stelter.
I don't know how she knows that about the Notebook, but she's right about the weatherman thing, and we'll get into to TV in a little while, because in a way we're all sort of TV or video reporters thanks to Twitter. But I'm kind of the old media guy here. I guess I'm the old print stodgy representative of the group. In a funny way, having gone from the web, from TV Newser, where I learned how to blog in college about 4 to 8 years ago, now to the Times, where I've been for the last 4 years. Really, the embodiment of old media, quote unquote, even though we're actually quite new and hip, I think, and agile. But the Times is definitely a symbol of old media, and I wanted to talk today about what I've learned from the Times, as well as what I've been able to teach there. At first, when Mashable approached me, they asked me to talk just about what I've taught the Times. But frankly, you have to start with what you've learned, because in many ways, I've gotten a lot more out of the exchange than they've received out of me. And the most important thing I think I learned right off the bat when I arrived 4 years ago was that you have to earn the right to teach. You can't talk about teaching the Times anything or talk about teaching any company anything until you've earned that right. And when I arrived at the paper, I thought that was just a cliche. I said it out loud to make my colleagues feel better, to ensure them I wasn't going to step on anybody's toes too quickly. I kept going around saying, I have a lot to learn, not entirely believing it. And I realized in a few months that it actually was true, that I actually did need to sit down, write a lot of stories, learn how the Times operated, and earn the right to teach, earn the right to be listened to. Because it is not automatically given. And I see a lot of people my age who go into organizations of all sizes and scales and move too fast to make too much change. I think that's a lesson that I learned right away, is that you've got to earn that right. Second thing I learned is that the Times takes journalism very seriously. The building we're in is the closest thing to a temple for journalism in this city, at least in my mind. We've got a giant organization of reporters and photo editors and editors and multimedia people now doing the work that needs to be done. And frankly, it's something I didn't take seriously enough when I arrived. I didn't realize the scope of it, and I didn't realize how few journalists were out on the ground in places that we are, that we're trying to cover the world. Not that we do it perfectly all the time, but it's surprising sometimes how few reporters are out there doing the grunt work, doing the labor on those overseas stories, and the Times is one of them. I've also learned at the Times that the print guys are no longer averse to change. The stereotype of the print reporter who doesn't want to work for the web, who doesn't want to tweet, who doesn't want to use Instagram, that is almost entirely out the window. It was once true, and even when I was at the paper 3 years ago, I would say it was true. I would sit in meetings, these seminars that I would try to teach about Twitter, try being the operative word, because it was hostile sometimes. It was sometimes downright derisive among a few of my colleagues. That's gone. Those meetings don't happen anymore. The meetings now about Twitter and about Google+, the most recent one we had, those rooms are full now. Those rooms are packed. There is not an aversion to the technology that there used to be. It was always overstated, but I think especially now it's overstated. But there's a corollary to that, and I would say that I've also learned to temper my expectations of those reporters who have grown up in the traditional model. There's a film called Page One that I'm in this year. It's a documentary about the Times media desk and how it was changing in 2009, 2010. And they caught me at one point out on the campus of Columbia speaking to students. They caught me at an unguarded moment. You can see a glass of wine in my hand. And I say, every reporter should be on Twitter. And I say it in a sort of aggressive way. I take it back. I don't think everybody should be on Twitter. I don't think every reporter needs necessarily to be on Twitter. For some reporters, Facebook might be better, or Tumblr might be better, or they should just be sharing, they should just be emailing. Who knows? It's not one size fits all. And I've come to learn that from the Times in the last 4 years, that as much as I want to evangelize certain mediums, what's more important is that they're listening and that they're interested in engaging and interacting, not so much what platform they're on. And that's where I want to turn to what I've been able to teach and what I hope I've been able to encourage at the Times. The first point being that we benefit when we listen. Listening is not an automatic trait for big media companies. It's not something that is embedded in the DNA of places like the New York Times, or for that matter, any other newspaper that you name. They're traditionally not that great at listening to the audience. They may read their reader emails and they may take phone calls from readers, but the act of listening on a deliberate way is something they weren't used to. I think the Times has made great strides in that, thanks to me and many other people who signed up for Twitter in the early days and signed up for Facebook in the early days and encouraged actually answering the phone when readers call. The Times for a long time was a fortress, and I think many people there, most people there would say that's true, with high walls that were hard to climb over. To pitch a story or to complain about a story or even to compliment a reporter was sometimes difficult. Not to say that it's easy all the time now, but I think the walls are coming down. I think in a way now the wall has many holes in it. It's more like a picket fence or something. Because more and more as reporters and as editors and as executives sign on to these sites, they realize that we benefit when we listen. And we benefit even more when we respond. I try to reply to every tweet I get, which is impossible sometimes when there's breaking news like Hurricane Irene, which I went down to North Carolina to cover. I wasn't able to respond to everybody, but I at least tried to read everything. I have this theory that when I reply to people on Twitter, and this is crazy, I know, they're going to be 1% more likely to pay for the New York Times. And I don't know if I can ever prove it, but I have that hope that it's going to come true. That if I reply, if I show them I'm a human being and not just a newspaper or a website, they're going to be more likely to be a loyal audience member, a loyal customer. And they're going to be the kind of person that signs up for the Times site and pays every month. They're not going to be able to prove it unless we have some sort of Amazon commission style model. But I do hope and I do think that's going to happen over time, that we benefit even more when we answer people, when we respond. Not just because our journalism is better, because it definitely is. And any blogger or reporter in the room knows that when you listen to your audience and you respond, your work gets better. But I also think business-wise, there are real benefits for journalists. The third thing I think I've taught, and I hope I've taught, is that we should embrace and not resist sharing our personal lives. Stacey was mentioning karaoke because I tweet about karaoke whenever I'm out. In fact, one night when Keith Olbermann quit his job at MSNBC, I asked my audience on Twitter for suggestions for songs to sing on the night of Keith's quitting, and got 150 responses, some really funny responses. That was a tweet about work, but it was also a tweet about my personal life. And I find that the more I share, the more I put into the machine, the more I'm getting out. It's obvious in some ways, but it's remarkable to me how it's true every time, that we should embrace sharing. And of course, for each reporter, for each editor at the time, sharing is going to take on different forms. Some people might be too humiliated by their karaoke singing to ever talk about it online. But I do think that there's been an understanding at the paper and at other papers like it that the more we share, the more we get out, and that we should embrace that instead of resisting it. The fourth thing that I hope I've taught, and I think I'm hopefully teaching now at the Times, is that we all need to be not TV reporters, but video reporters. And this is where that weatherman point comes in. The part of journalism I think about most these days is video, and especially live video. It's something that I worry about because I don't know if newspapers and media companies like the Times are doing enough to move to online video. If you look at what the Wall Street Journal is doing, they are doing at least 4 hours a day of live video on their websites. They are basically a TV network. They just don't call themselves that. But what they're doing is they're broadcasting live like a TV network. And I would imagine that a few years from now, many, many, many other sites will be doing the same. I think we have to, as reporters, embrace the fact that we're all going to be not TV reporters in the future, but video reporters. I sort of assumed I couldn't be a weatherman. I assumed I couldn't be Matt Lauer because I was already starting to bald a little bit up top. And now I realize that's actually not going to be a problem, perhaps. Perhaps normal-looking people and not the plastic surgery infused people we see on TV sometimes, are actually going to be more appealing on online video and be more interesting to watch. And I think by doing weekly videos with David Carr that we're starting to show what we can do on video at the Times. Video is a great example of just going out and doing it and not asking whether we can do it or not. David and I have all sorts of ideas we talk about for video, and just by going and experimenting, we've been able to do a lot at the Times. I think that's true in other old-line media companies as well. Going out, trying stuff, and not necessarily having high expectations or lots of buy-in has been a pretty successful model for us. Not every time, but often enough to keep trying it. I've also figured out at the Times, and I've tried to teach my colleagues this, that you can punch above your weight by having a personal brand, by going and recording videos, or by having a Twitter account that is helpful for your beat, or by having an Instagram page or a Tumblr page. You can punch above your weight, and you're able to stand out in a way that, frankly, maybe you shouldn't. And maybe you shouldn't be standing out in the way that you are, but you're able to do it because you have that identity online that people relate to. I think there are a couple of other things that I've learned from the Times that I would have not expected when I arrived. One of them is that institutional brand is as important and usually more important than the personal brand. It bears repeating all the time because I see too many of my colleagues at other places, and a lot of my friends who graduate school at other places worry so much about their personal identity and their personal brand that it hurts their institutional brand, that they don't care about the company they're at, the company they're working for. The reality is we have to care about both. We have to get that balance right. When I was covering Hurricane Irene, as Stacey mentioned, and earlier in the year when I covered the Joplin tornado, my tweets were posted on the homepage of the Times website. And of course, that was fantastic for me. I was getting thousands of new followers. We were sending traffic directly from the Times homepage over to my Twitter page. It was a huge gain for me. But I had to keep in mind when I was doing that, when I was getting all that influx of traffic, to be posting tweets about the Times, linking to the Times the whole time, to make sure that the institution was reaping the same rewards that I was reaping, and hopefully more rewards. That was a major takeaway for me this year when it comes to Twitter. A couple of things that I've learned that have been really important. One is not to self-censor. As a young person going into an old institution, you sometimes want to hold back. You sometimes want to bite your own tongue. You sometimes want to self-censor. And what I mean by that is maybe not pitch a story that you think is too far off to the side, or not bother trying to create some new little project like a Tumblr account for a blog or something. What I've realized at the paper, and what I think is true across the industry, is that we have a lot more power as individuals than we think if we don't self-censor, if we don't censor ourselves, if we don't hold back. Doesn't mean we're going to win every time, but oftentimes when we share, when we try things on our own, when we pitch stories that might be a little bit on the edges, we're going to get a thumbs up. We're going to get support for it. Once you've earned the right to teach, and once you've earned the right to do that, the benefits can be exceptional. And finally, what I've learned on both sides, what I've learned from the Times, as well as what I've been taught, what I've been able to teach at the Times, is that we should ask basic questions, that we shouldn't get too stuck in the niches that we're in. I've learned from the Times to ask basic questions about my beat, which is mostly television and media. Asking basic questions like, why do 5 companies control most of the media in the United States? Asking a question like, why is our broadband so slow at night? These basic questions oftentimes get overlooked by the day-to-day cavalcade of incremental news. Company earnings statements and product announcements are exciting and are interesting and are page view friendly. But the basic questions are much more important to our audiences. They're much more interesting to figure out also. That's an example for me of not self-censoring. I used to not think about those basic questions, and I used to worry too much about writing daily news stories that didn't really move the ball forward. And I've come to realize we have to ask those questions. On the same side, I think I've taught the Times and taught my colleagues in little ways to ask those same basic questions about the way we do our work and the way that our processes work. Why shouldn't we try Tumblr for this project? Asking, why shouldn't we be live blogging this event? Why shouldn't I be checking in? Why shouldn't I post tweets from this company meeting. Once in a while, you're going to put your hand a little bit too close to the stove, and it's good to find out how warm that stove actually is, once you've earned the right to at least get near the stove. But I think asking those basic questions is more beneficial more of the time than it is damaging. On both sides, it's about tackling big ideas, tackling big topics. So for me, I try to write big stories and not get too stuck in the day-to-day and when I can avoid it. Today, by the way, I failed. I'm writing about Kim Kardashian. So I got stuck in the muck today. But for the most part, trying to write big stories and ask big questions. And then in our institutions, ask big questions about the way we do our jobs. Ask why we have to have 3 editors on a blog post before it's up. Ask ask those basic questions, and we're going to get very interesting answers. I suppose in the end, it's about not getting stuck in the muck of the narrow-minded and the mundane stories are out there, and not getting stuck in that same muck in our own companies, where it seems like all too often we're worrying about the next week or the next month, or the next quarter. The really interesting developments and the really interesting opportunities are out there in the big picture. And at the 4 years I've been at the Times, I've both learned to look at that big picture and also try to encourage my colleagues to do the same. Thank you all for your time.